Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear where you think we got it right and where you think we completely missed the point. You can do that by going to unsilentpodcast.com. You can leave a comment in the Rumble platform or in a variety of different other social media platforms. So, Brian, here we are. We have a new president. We have a slew of things happening. We've got some people melting down. It's fun times in America.
It's been a wild few days. So you and I are recording this on a Wednesday, and inauguration was Monday. So we're only 50 hours or 54 hours or whatever since inauguration. But I gotta say, first I want to come completely clean, and I kept telling my wife, if they're going to take him out, like, what better place than the inauguration?
Yeah, right.
Right. And so I was honestly kind of expecting a lot more hoopla, not necessarily like just an assassination attempt, but like if there was going to be a ruckus, like that would have been the optimum moment to do that. And it seems like there wasn't a whole lot of that. There's lots of stuff to talk about, lots of things that happened, but nothing on that front.
No, and thankfully there's been remarkably few things. Now there's been some protests. There was the Women's March, which has now been renamed to the People's March because
People's March, yeah.
I mean, at least that's consistent. Since the left doesn't really understand what a woman is, then maybe they have a clue about what people are, and so calling it the People's March, I guess that's okay. So they paraded around and talked about how things were so horrible now that Orange Hitler's the president.
Yeah.
So there's that, and I think there's a protest up here in Seattle. Of course, there's always a protest up here in Seattle. So
it was just a Monday. It's not because of the inauguration.
Yeah, that's right. It's a day ending in Y, so it's worth it.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I tell you what is interesting to me, Brian. Tell me if you sense this too. I mean, there's a whole different vibe kind of in the country overall. I mean,
100%.
In this time around, so this is obviously not the first go around with Trump as president, but the first time around there wasn't this kind of new general feeling across the public. Certainly was not a bunch of people coming out who would accept him that previously, thought he was horrible. Now there's obviously the diehard folks that are upset that he was elected, and I totally understand, that's not going to go away. But it seems to me that across media, I mean, across, maybe not all media, but across entertainment. I mean, it's become acceptable to say he's okay, and we hope he succeeds. And there's also a new sense of kind of American optimism. I mean, do you think that's true?
Yeah, I do. There was some people, I watched a little bit of the news Monday night after the inauguration and stuff. And there was people talking in DC, which I think voted 92% for Harris, if I remember correctly. So in Washington, D.C., in bars, and the national championship college football game was going on.
Right.
And so a person was in a bar where they were showing the national championship football game, and Trump had done like a commercial, like a quick, like, not a commercial, he had like a recorded statement for the people watching the channel that and when that popped up on the TV, like, you couldn't hear anything apparently, but the entire bar just erupted in cheers in DC. Now, the same person said a year ago, there's no way in hell that would happen. Like, it's just not possible. Right. So I think that certainly there's pockets of people who are unhappy, but I think there's a diminishing number of people who can't acknowledge that we were just on the wrong track.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think part of it is the people, it's okay now to say that we were on the wrong track. I mean, if you look at like the executive orders about, there's two genders, there's male and female, and we're not going to do this whole identitarian thing anymore. certainly that's his position with the federal government, but it seems to me that it's become okay to come out as being normal.
Yeah,
Credit where credit's due. Ben Shapiro calls this the revenge of the normies.
yeah,
Oh, and I think that's kind of true. I mean, the basic stuff of America, apple pie, and God are kind of okay to be now, and people aren't as
yeah.
afraid to say it as they used to be.
Well, I mean, if you just look at data on a few things, we're already seeing, like, I think it's September, October, 11% of FHA mortgages were in default. In November, December, I think a record number, or not a record number, but the highest since like '07 on credit card delinquencies.
Yeah.
Credit card, credit cards are maxed out to levels never seen before. 1.3 trillion or something like that is the last
Yeah.
number I heard. These are meaningful impacts on people. Where I get my sense is, I have kind of two thoughts on it. One is my sense is just the practical um, discomforts of real, in my opinion, obviously bad policies, bad governing, bad monetary things are they're beginning to have like real consequences.
Right.
And also, I think there's now this the Republican team, if you will, they're excited. They're cheering. They're calling it the new golden age. They're using this language that's very enthusiastic and very
Right.
positive. And I think you can only fight that for so long before you just go like, why am I fighting this? Like, why am I fighting success for the country? I think, and there's probably a million other dynamics too, but those seem to be the most prevalent to me of just the gravity winning, like you and I always talk about. But how long can you be miserable and hate yourself and hate your country and hate your heritage and hate? I think people just get tired probably.
Yeah, and when another alternative comes around, so
Right.
it's interesting.
A socially acceptable now alternative comes along. Yeah,
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 and one that's aspirational and positive and
yeah,
says things like America's golden age. As Americans, as a general sort of vibe for the country across our history, I think Trump did get it right. We're pioneers, we're explorers, we like to take on new challenges, we're generally optimistic. I think that has always been true, and that kind of general American attitude has been suppressed for quite some
yeah.
time. And
Yeah,
people,
and there's an irony here too. I know you got a million things you want to get to, so I'll be brief. And this is not my original thought. I don't know where I heard it, but it's worth repeating. The irony is, if Trump would have won in 2020, he would have had a massive uphill battle the entire 4 years,
right.
and he would have likely not accomplished much. He probably would have faced more impeachments or more whatever distractions, and he didn't have the Senate. I mean, he had an uphill battle.
Oh, yeah.
The irony is now that he wins the House, the Senate, he's got the Supreme Court. Like now he's going downhill. It's almost kind of a funny irony to me that this all turned out the way it did, and now he's actually got like smoother sailing than he would have.
Yeah, I've had the exact same thought. I mean, you almost kind of think that this was sort of pre-planned. You know, when
Some of these things do border on that higher power stepping in thing between the assassination and I mean, what do I
yeah.
know, right? But it does kind of feel like that in a sense, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, it's like it's a good story. This would have made a good novel, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you take from 2008 to now, this would have made a great novel. Because I mean, it's got the twists, the turns, the underdog gets
yeah.
down and unfairly accused of this and that and the other thing, and then he comes roaring back against all odds.
Yep.
It's
You
just
you and I talked about this like 6 months ago or so. My point at the time was I think the left and hard progressives misjudged America's desire to root for a hero. I mean,
yeah,
you look at like the movie Rocky, the movie Rudy, uh the Hunt for Red October. Like name a blockbuster movie. It's
right,
always about somebody who goes through the absolute trials and the worst trials and tribulations and comes
right,
out victorious in whatever way is the context of the movie.
right.
That is that is baked into our DNA.
It
And
is.
and so they gave this guy this hero journey that is epic. I mean, it's absolutely epic on whether you like the guy or not. It's an epic hero story. And you look at the the unwavering determination. That is as American as you get. You look at like, having to endure hardship and like you and I are in business. Like this is the entrepreneurial journey. Like
Yeah.
the first several years suck really bad, and you want to quit many times, and nobody's rooting for you, and the cards are stacked against you, and you got to overcome competitors and ignorance on how to run a business, and you got to. It's the epic story. That's why the success stories are always so grand, and
Yeah.
they created this epic hero journey story for this man that they absolutely despise. It's it's hard not to find it humorously ironic.
It is, and they made him the underdog, so you take a guy who's been phenomenally successful in media and real estate, and they made him into an underdog, and so, and America loves an underdog. I mean,
Yeah.
we love our heroes. We especially love it when our underdogs become our heroes.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, that's the story of Rocky.
yeah.
Like name a blockbuster movie that's the Marvel characters. They Spider-Man has his origin story, and like you like you said, you couldn't written it better in a novel, I don't think.
No, I don't think you could. I think it's well, and I was thinking about this because we talk oftentimes on the podcast about the fourth turning and coming crisis and all this. And you tell me what you think, but it seems to me that this all goes to the setup of the great champion of the one that is so. Even though we're kind of at a morning in America moment, to use the Reagan-esque language, even though we're there right now, there's it. We are going to face a crisis of some sort, whether it's war with China or I mean, it's probably going to be foreign at this point, is my guess. I don't know, but so that's going to come, and this, even though it feels great right now, the mood feels great in the country. It doesn't avoid that inevitability. It just empowers somebody to be in a position when that does come to be able to face it with the nation behind it. Now, I don't know if that's, and we don't know. I mean, we don't know how these cycles are going to play out, but I don't know if that's going to be in the next 4 years or not. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it's within, before 2029, that
Yeah.
whatever happens is going to happen. But I don't think
Yeah, I think the last time I heard Neil Howe, one of the authors of the Fourth Turning and the
yeah,
complete author of the Fourth Turning is here. Last time I heard him speak on a podcast or YouTube video or whatever it was a few months ago, I think, before the holidays. And he was kind of pinpointing, 27, 28, 29, somewhere in there will be the basin,
yeah,
the valley.
yeah.
So,
Well,
you know, um, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Like when we first started talking about doing this podcast, we banded around. Well, who's the great champion going to be? And like, well, it can't be Trump. And then it seems pretty certain that we're heading in that direction. And I find myself kind of torn. I love the optimism. I love the enthusiasm. I
yeah,
love the idea of the golden age. And I also believe strongly that we have not yet begun to pay for the poor decision making that was happening for the last several years.
yeah,
And
that's
and I think we're only in the beginning of uncovering. I think we are just at the tip of the iceberg of uncovering what that was. And what I mean by that is I find it really interesting that all the pardons, starting with Hunter Biden,
mhm,
and then ending with the ones that were delivered at 11:41 a.m. the morning of inauguration. We'll get to that for sure. All of them go back to 2014.
yeah,
And remember that video we broke down of Mike Benz,
yeah, Mike Benz,
when
yeah,
we talked about all the change in suppression and censorship, all started in 2014. I don't think we have 2% of the understanding of what started happening in that era of
right,
2014. I don't think we understand very much of that stuff at all. I think that there's a lot of there. I have no idea what it is,
right,
but it seems awfully coincidental to me that all the pardons go back to 2014. Mike
yeah,
Benz, all his stuff talks about 2014. Like, I think that we are not even close to uncovering all the things that have been happening under the surface that probably have pretty significant consequences.
yeah. I suspect that's true. And the question will be whether or not we will, or how much of that will we ultimately learn before whatever kind of crisis event ultimately happens?
Yeah.
Now, there are some things. Trump's talking about transparency and bringing the all the assassination records for JFK
Yeah.
and Martin Luther King. He's talking about,
UAPs. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that's gonna.
oh
He's
yeah,
he's been talking about. Real quick, just kind of button up my point there. I'm kind of torn. I love the optimism. I desperately want to be optimistic and believe this is the golden age. And I also have this just belief that we've not yet even begun to pay the piper for some of the stuff that's been happening.
I agree with you. I mean, yes, I totally agree with you. I think what's happening right now with this optimism in Trump is essentially just setting up the background so that the gray leader, the gray champion, can face with a more united nation behind him
Yeah,
the crisis that is to come. And
yeah,
however you conceive that this all happens, that is a perfect setup. His reelection, his underdog status. Hey, I was an underdog once, and now we're facing this foreign war or whatever.
yeah,
We can beat this thing. We can overcome it. I mean, it's just and the fascinating thing too about that sort of goes to that point of this attitude and the attitude that we need to face whatever's coming is the fact that during his inaugural speech, he didn't go. I mean, he did a certain amount of grievance. These guys did
yeah,
this. I mean,
yeah.
side note, that was really awkward. you know,
There have been a number of awkward moments over the last several weeks where
yeah.
it's funny. This is where him not being a politician really there adds a new layer of awkwardness that we wouldn't historically have had for sure.
Oh
But
yeah.
I find it absolutely refreshing. I find
Oh
it just
yeah.
wonderful. Again, whether or not you like the guy or not, I'm not saying he's a great guy. I'm not saying he's great. Forget all that stuff for a second. I just love the fact that a guy will go up there and not have to read a teleprompter to tell us what he feels and thinks.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, so I do think that all of that setup, started with the inauguration, and with his speech during the inauguration, he didn't go back and talk about 2020 a whole bunch.
Oh,
I mean, obviously, he's pardoned a bunch of the folks from the J6 arrests and
yeah,
jails, so he's done a bunch of that, but he didn't go back and say, "Okay, now, Joe, I'm gonna get you, and Hillary, lock her up." He didn't
yeah, yeah,
do
yeah,
all that stuff, and, that so even his tone is different than it's
yeah,
been since 2020 happened.
yeah,
It's like, I mean, he's the same guy because he still, does his zingers and that kind of thing.
yeah.
But there was a lot of that that looked quite leaderly and presidential as he was talking about these things, and very, very American, very American.
Yes, I think that's I'd say more American than leaderly because Americans do tend to speak their minds. I mean, we're
Yeah.
known abroad as, we say things that piss
Wow.
people off or outlandish or we exaggerate or like we
Yeah.
make compelling cases to present our side of the story, however you want to frame it. That's a pretty American thing to do. Other cultures and countries are much more reserved with that kind of thing. We're kind of brash on that thing, and I think that it's almost like we need that. We've been under this weird era of censorship and secrecy and hidden agendas, and like I think that's part of the reason why there's a lot of enthusiasm is like even if you don't agree with the guy, at least you know what the hell he's thinking.
Yeah.
There's no ambiguity about what's on his mind, even if you think he's crazy for saying it.
Right. I think that's one of the biggest things about this election and about everything that's happening right now is the whole free speech argument, and even more than just free speech, but as you say, the sort of unleashing of the suppressed American spirit, regardless of what you
Yeah,
think it's been. I feel this way, but I don't want to say this because I might get in trouble or I might get canceled or I might get fired or
yeah,
whatever it happens to be. And that's been the way it's been for a very long time. It's been very uncomfortable. And there's been a lot of people that haven't been willing to say anything, even though they felt it. And
yeah,
so that's where it's frustrating that it doesn't happen faster. It's frustrating that you have to go through that amount of time where, just sharing your thoughts can get you into trouble, but it eventually did come around to the American spirit being pretty indomitable. I mean,
yeah,
one of the things you think about this is that we as a country, I mean, and everything he's sort of pitching us that here's who we are is, don't mess with us.
yeah,
We're indomitable. I mean, you might think we're brash, you might think we're arrogant, you might think we're kind of loud. I'll tell you one thing, a little side note. I was in England one time and I always ask when I'm in other countries, the people who drive me around, what do you think of Americans? And
I do the same thing. It's funny you say that. I always do the same thing with the drivers. Yeah,
Well, and I loved hearing their opinions. And this guy in England, he didn't say much for a while, and he looked at me, and he said, "You're a loud lot." And I just laughed. I said, "You got it. We are a loud lot, especially compared to Brits or Canadians.
Yeah.
We're
Oh,
definitely,
especially compared to Canadians. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, the 51st state. Yeah, that's true."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you make of the whether this mood can last?
Well, um, before we go, this might segue into that.
Yeah.
What do you what do you think about the pardons coming 19 minutes before the inauguration?
Oh my gosh.
I
Well,
I think that is going to be a tailwind for Trump and a headwind for Biden. I
yeah.
think that may have almost sealed the, like, people who were, like, on the fence, like, "I'm not sure this is great and we're heading in the right direction." I think that might have changed some minds and hearts.
I'm sure it did. And so, first of all, a mea culpa on my part, because you asked the question a few weeks back. I don't remember exactly which week, but you asked the question a few weeks back. Do you think he's really going to preemptively pardon people? And I said, no, I just don't see how that's possible. Well, there you go. I was wrong.
What did I say? Did I give an opinion?
Well, you indicated that you thought that's more possible than I did. So
Yeah.
that
I don't know if I said it or not, but and maybe I changed my mind the day you asked me, but I was reasonably confident. I didn't expect like nieces and spouses, but I thought for sure Jim, I thought for sure he would be pardoned. And I thought for sure Fauci, and I thought for sure the J6 committee and yeah.
but
Well,
that's
I shouldn't say for
staggering.
sure. I was not certain of anything, but if I had to lean one way, I would have leaned towards that he was going to do it.
But that is really and the reason I didn't think he'd do it, because that's staggering in terms of precedent, in terms of what it says about, I mean, so the excuse obviously is, well, we don't want that vindictive Trump going after innocent people, and my family's all innocent. So that's a spin. Okay, you could maybe make that spin. That's fine. But I think most people on a gut level are going to say, well, look, if you pardon all these people, you must have in the back of your mind someplace that something's been wrong. Something's wrong,
Yeah.
there. And
Again, the Fauci pardon goes back to 2014. It's wild. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, that is, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out about all. I mean, well, and Rand Paul, I don't know if you saw his statements about all. Yeah, I mean, I think the gloves are off for some of the.
I certainly think the gloves are off, and I think people. This is just me speaking as Brian, a regular American, who knows nothing about anything. I think people deserve to know,
Yes,
and I think that there's enough people now between JD Vance and Rand Paul and others that I think they're being quiet till they get confirmed through the confirmation process.
right.
But the people who he's put in his cabinet are not cowards. They're not shy, and I think they have a fundamental desire to uncover the truth, because if they don't, that then we know 10% or 5% or 2% of the bad things that happen. If they don't uncover the rest, it won't ever be put to bed. We
Yeah.
we won't ever the country can't ever really learn how bad things were. I think there's just a lot of people who just, including me, who just don't know how bad it was or is.
Well, and this is kind of I don't want to say the last chance, but it's one of the last chances, if you will, for trust to be restored in the American
Yeah.
system.
If presumably Vance will be the presidential candidate in 28, if he doesn't win in 28 and a Harris or Gavin Newsom type does, we'll never learn. We'll never know. It'll be JFK all over again. We'll never know what
Right.
happened.
Well, and at the same time, it'll be, I mean, if institutional trust right now is at a low, and
Yeah.
if Trump and his cabinet, and I agree with you about his cabinet. I mean, I'm very impressed with the people he's hired. The first time around, there was a lot of people like Jim Mattis that I was very impressed by. So
Yeah.
it's
I was really disappointed by Mad Dog Maddox, to be honest with you. And then there's the Omarosas that I was not impressed with the hires.
no, there were certainly ones. This time around, it's much better. But
Yeah.
the key to the success or not of his presidency is hiring the right people, getting them
Yeah.
in the right places, and he's certainly
Yeah.
doing that. Well, to the point we were talking about earlier, with the sort of the shift in vibe and feeling in the country. did you see that John Fetterman is supporting Pete Hegseth for Defense Department? So,
Fetterman is, I don't know, we're for those listening now in 2025, we're doing this podcast talking to somebody who's middle-aged person in the year like 2070, 2090, somewhere in there. And Dave and I have a theory that they're going to be looking back in this era, wondering what the hell we were thinking, as all these things were what would be perceived by then was as craziness. I'm sure whichever direction we go, the people at that time will think we were crazy right now. I'm pretty confident in that. I don't know that Fetterman, depending on his career trajectory and how it goes, I don't know if he'll make the history book. So I will say, and David, my point with that is, David, I don't want to cover things that will be readily available in whatever version of a history book there is. If Fetterman doesn't make it in the history books, this is an important point. Not just for me personally, he's completely blown me away. I was like, that guy can't win the election. Like, his brain's fried. Like, he's got real traumatic injuries and whatever it is, and stroke and all that stuff. That guy has turned out to be a pretty sensible guy in a lot of ways, which is just flooring me. And because the progressive hard left pushed for him so hard, and now he's kind of flouting them, what do?
Yeah,
they spent a year saying that this is the guy that's got to win, and he's actually pretty pragmatic. He's actually pretty balanced. He doesn't agree with everything, but he's not shy about saying the things he does agree with. I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with the guy.
Yeah, and I agree. There's plenty of stuff that he says that I don't agree with, but on the flip side of that, he's honest. He seems to be very honest about it. He seems to be, like, he's supportive of Israel. He's supportive of our defense of Israel. I mean,
to your point, I couldn't cite his positions on much of anything. I just appreciate his honesty.
Yeah.
I appreciate his willingness and ability to just say what he thinks. The policy positions are less important to me, honestly, in many ways.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another, talking about the American spirit, the American vibe, that is a part of the kind of American ethos, and that is be transparent, with good, bad, or ugly,
Be honest.
Be honest.
That's why we're allowed a lot, because we're honest, right?
We're honest about it, right? We don't, the British, when they fart, they just, America's
So,
like,
so you asked me a question that I kind of stepped on, which was, is it sustainable? Is that the question you were asking? So this is where I think it's interesting that Trump's not a politician, because if he was a politician, well, let me put it this way: if I was an insider political, 50 years in DC kind of guy, and I just got elected, I would make sure that I looked good at the end of my 4 years, not worry about the beginning of my 4 years. So
Sure.
Stock market's at an all-time high. That would have to be crashed, because if I don't crash it now, it could crash in 2 years and tarnish my legacy.
Right.
Right. So you would have to, a politician would have to make decisions based on that calculus.
Right.
Trump's not a politician, so he may not do those things. Now, some might argue that he's foolish for not, or whatever. I don't know, but those kind of political maneuvers that aren't great for people in the short term, but make him look good in the long term, I don't think Trump's likely to do that stuff. So I think that we're seeing the legacy media, meaning television media and old print media, they're falling right back where they were. Elon did a Nazi salute. That's already the first thing. And Trump had billionaires on the dais when he was inaugurated. That's bad. Now all of a sudden, it's so funny that in 94 days or 112 days or whatever it's been, billionaires went from being absolutely on our team to now they're outcasts again.
Right.
And so that they're picking up the playbook where they are. My gut tells me that it will have diminishing returns even more. I mean, they lost 50% of viewership after the election on some of the cable channels and whatever. I think that'll continue to diminish.
Yeah.
And unless he really stubs his toe on something pretty massive, I think he is going to have some headwinds for a while. I think there's a lot of things that are out of his control with, the economy is contracting in many countries. And when that happens, we've all been kind of a global economy for the last, 20 years, I would say, maybe somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But as things start to fall apart, countries are going to get more selfish. They're going to make currency decisions that are going to benefit them and them only at the expense of others. And there's big things at play that are not in his control. I've talked about the WEF before. I think that there's, and that Brezhnev video we talked about, where he talked about the communist, what do you call it? The communist not cabal, but it was some, I don't know, some global global communist conspiracy is what he called it.
Yes.
Those people haven't gone anywhere.
Right.
The WEF folks and those types of global big players. I think he's going to have some things that he's not going to see coming, because I think that those kinds of people with those power abilities are going to be increasingly painted into a corner where they have to do more and more devious and meaningful things to get their way. And I think some of those things are coming his way. I think he'll navigate it reasonably well. So I just I think it is sustainable, Dave, just because I think people who are afraid to speak out are just tired of being negative.
Yeah. And that's exactly where I come down on it. I think everything you said is true about, a lion backed into a corner is going to fight twice as hard. So, anybody who's losing power, legacy media, global elites, et cetera, they're going to fight twice as hard to maintain what they've got. So that's absolutely going to happen. And so be it. I don't care. I mean, let them do what they're going to do.
Do what they
But
do.
I do think, like you said, I think that and actually even the finer point of my question is, can this attitude of America that we have right now, we're not America again, we're America. So I think that attitude is so refreshing to so many people that we're not going to easily give it up to be canceled or to be shut down again. I think people are going to, I think in a lot of cases, people are going to, oh, you're just a bunch of racists. Then we're going to laugh it off. Oh, homophobe, transphobe, little old lady phobe, whatever. I think people are just done with that to a great extent. And I do think that unity, so we're not unified necessarily with John Fetterman, who we're talking about, but the unity in terms of policy, I would say, but the unity in terms of attitude of, a Democrat can be a patriotic American, a Republican can be a patriotic American.
Yeah.
I think that's back in vogue. And I think that will continue despite what obstacles come. And maybe I'm just too, I'm an optimistic kind of fellow. Hopefully it's not rose-colored glasses, but I do think that, again, that's going to be the necessary backdrop for when the great international, and I think
Whatever the crisis is, like we
be
thought we were heading for the crisis. Looks like we may have avoided a internal crisis, i.e. the non trench warfare, civil war that you and I kind of talked about here and there. I do think that we have likely averted that.
Yeah.
I think we've likely averted a rebellion against the government if we keep trending in this direction.
Right.
So it does seem like it would be more of a global kind of conflict if the fourth turning plays out the way it has historically, and these crises happen every 80 to 90 years.
Right.
And for those of you listening now, you can Google the fourth turning and see the cycles, the 80, 90 year cycles David and I are talking about, where these crises happen. Last one was the Great Depression and World War II. The one before that was the Civil War. The one before that was the Revolutionary War. The one before that was Bacon's Rebellion, or whatever it was. These things happen in cycles. So David and I aren't just making this stuff up. These are pretty well researched ideas. I think that the momentum is certainly going in the right direction as far as that spirit that you're talking about, and I think it kind of parallels. Like I imagine, like somewhere around, I don't know, 1983, 1985, probably somewhere, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years earlier. I don't know when it was, but coming out of the civil rights era in like Mississippi, there was a point in time where the majority are like, no, it's not okay to hate black people.
Right.
And there was a turning point where the majority are like, no, that's not okay. And now you're the weirdo for having this hate based on somebody's skin color.
Right.
Where prior to that, a big enough percentage of the population thought that was cool, and they operated that way, and people just accepted it. But there was a turning point somewhere where that became like not so. People had to be really quiet about it at a minimum, or they changed their hearts and minds. Right.
Right.
I kind of think it's the same thing here. Like the movement's going in the right direction, and to fight a overall positive spirit, I think that's a great word for it. Even if you don't like the policies, to fight the positive spirit of pursuing a new golden age, I think is just going to wear thin on people. And I think that it's gonna be harder and harder to like state a case of why we should go back to ugliness and divisiveness and looking for things to be pissed off about, rather than just like, how about we just jump in and make it better?
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if we have great international or great national goals, such as let's plant the American flag on Mars. I mean, I remember as a kid watching the astronauts. I was very young, but watching the astronauts come off the landing module and step on the moon. I'm like, and even as a kid, I got patriotic vibes from that.
Yeah.
So, when he talked about that, I mean, he didn't set up by the end of this decade, this
Right,
camp,
right, right.
but he still set up a kind of a national goal that anybody could get behind, whether it's
Yeah.
Republican, Democrat, progressive. I mean, the certain people would never get behind it, just like a lot of people didn't get behind the space program to take us to the moon because we got problems on Earth thing. But
Right.
the national impetus to do something great, I think, is something that's been lacking in America for so long that
Yeah.
aren't going to give that up easily.
And that's not a political achievement. That's a national slash species achievement. And
Right.
again, I like why would you be against that? I mean, I think people are just gonna like appear odd to be fighting those kinds of things. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
It'll just be out of it'll just I mean, imagine coming to Thanksgiving dinner, this last year, there's people saying don't go to Thanksgiving if they voted for Trump and all that kind of stuff, fine. But imagine going to Thanksgiving 2025 and arguing against like that kind of prosperity and aiming
Right.
for those kinds of it's just going to be weird. Like it's an awkward conversation to have, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I do think this changing age, one of the things I wanted to circle back on real quick was this notion that the death of globalism, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
we're all global trade. That's a feature of Earth now, but there is a sort of retrenchment, not just in America, not just in the U.S., but
Yeah.
around the world in sort of nationalist feeling and vibe. I mean,
Yeah.
look at some of the national leaders that came to the inauguration. Javier Milei from Argentina
Yeah.
was there, and we've talked about
Yeah.
him. But another very impressive guy who's shaking stuff up and actually saving their country. So I think there is a sort of a global change in the feeling that countries have, in a return to the notion that, hey, if I'm from Pakistan, then I should want to make Pakistan great again. If I'm from
Yeah.
Azerbaijan, I should be a patriot Azerbaijani, you know?
Yeah.
So what's wrong? What's wrong with that? And it's a slap in the face to the WEF, globalist folks that, there's one humanity. And well, sure, there's one humanity. And if we go to Mars together, we'll bring everybody with us. But
Yeah.
but in terms
Yeah,
of
if we were attacked by somebody from Orion, the Orion's Belt Nebula, whatever it is out there, we would all be a unified species against that. I
right,
guarantee it.
right. Oh, 100%. At the same time, I think, kind of this idea of returning to a common sense view of I'm gonna be patriotic about the place I'm from, whether that's England
Yes.
or United States
Yeah.
or Brazil, or I don't care where, Fiji. Make Fiji great again.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with you, and I think that will get tailwinds from them having to make these decisions about currencies and
Yeah,
their structure financially for out of self-preservation. I think all that stuff is going to go kind of hand in glove. But I agree with you 100%. This notion that like people who would say like make America great again is racist or is this or that. I always said exactly what you just said. People in Pakistan should want to make Pakistan the greatest country of all time, and
right.
people in Canada should do the same, and
Yeah,
people in Panama should do the same thing. We should all be doing that. Why would you? Why would you not want a country to do any country? Forget which country. Why would
yeah.
you not want a country to do that? It's crazy.
That would be odd, and again, it would be a denial of reality. So the reality is that we are tribal creatures to a great extent, and we want to make our little portion of the world a great place to be. It's just natural to do so, and that's really all I think that MAGA really means, is make
Yeah,
America the greatest place it can be.
yeah. So, of the I don't know, it was like 200 or so executive actions. Not all of them were executive orders, but there was a
Yeah,
bunch of executive actions. I have to tell you, my favorite one, and there was a bunch I really liked,
yeah,
obviously. Again, I don't know if Trump's a guy I'd want to like hang out with every Thursday night and play poker or whatever. I'd probably get enough of the brashness. He's probably a
yeah,
little too over the top for me personally. Um, but I can't argue with like some of the things that he's done and is doing. I'm fully in support of. I
yeah,
think my favorite one of all the executive actions, well, my favorite one's probably the J6 stuff. I just wish we'd put that to bed and move on. So, but um, taking us out of the WHO right out of the gate, I was like, I think that might be my favorite one.
Yeah,
I was just like, I was like, I was in our bedroom and doing some stuff, and I heard it on the news in the background. I ran out to the living room and told my wife, "Can you believe that he just did that?" Like, I was over the moon about that one. I don't know why that one stuck out so much for me. Probably because of the censorship and all the deceptiveness and forcing things on people without giving them all the correct information.
right.
I was over the moon about that one. Which one, or ones plural, did you like best?
Well, there's been a whole bunch of them there. I mean, that are just like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Um, that one, I think the WHO one is one of my favorites because it again talks about the re-Americanization of America because it's a
Yeah.
slap in the face to the global order. So that pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, I believe that global warming's happening and all that, but all a bunch of countries getting together and making speeches and talking about things that they never ever end up doing is
And us
pointless.
just paying a bunch of money while China's building 100 coal plants a year, whatever the pace that they're on is,
Yeah.
it's just insane.
That's ridiculous. The other thing that I really love is he's looking at all the UN programs that we're not going to support anymore.
Yeah.
So UNRWA, who was complicit in the October 7th massacres in Israel, and
Yeah.
we're the big ones that fund the UN. I mean, come
Yeah.
on, get us the heck out of
And UNRWA, if I'm not mistaken, they are the ones, or not the ones, they're one of the ones actively facilitating the migration of people who go down to the Darien Gap and like come up through Mexico. UNRWA somehow is very heavily involved in that, if I'm not mistaken. That piece of the UN that, like, we're paying them for our own invasion.
Yeah,
Just
it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, and I think it's Elise Stefanik who's been was she the one that was appointed as the new UN ambassador? I
I think so.
heard
Yeah.
her speech, and that was brilliant. That was just brilliant. So I like all that, but I also want to say something about these executive orders. As a general rule, the way that we do things now as a country, but rule by executive orders that change every 4 years is a really bad way to run a country. I mean,
Yeah, it's not always drawn up. Yeah.
so I agree with at least all the ones that I've seen. I can't keep track of all the that pile of executive orders just citing. So I agree with most of those. But it's a terrible way to run a country, and it isn't what the founders had in mind. We should,
No.
a lot of that stuff should have been done by legislation. And
Yeah.
but so hopefully, I don't think it's going to get fixed anytime soon, but hopefully it does. So anyway, just a disclaimer on the executive order piece that bugs me because
Yeah.
there's things. Well, and I do suspect that the other thing is going to keep on. I think every president now, from now on, since Biden did what he did, he broke the sort of prohibition on doing this, is going to pardon his whole family and everybody he likes and stuff. I think,
Well, I have a different take on that. Let's come back to that
okay,
in a second. I have one more thought on the executive orders.
yeah,
One of the things that Trump is doing, these things that are hard to argue against.
sure.
One of those was requiring all federal employees to go back to work.
Yeah, when only
And
6%
I
work.
I heard I think it was MSNBC, it might have been CNN. I just heard a blurb about some woman was on there saying, "Well, what about the people who have hardships at home, and what about the people who've moved away from the DC area, because they need to take care of a loved one or whatever?" And I'm like, what about the people who have regular jobs who have to deal with that stuff? Like,
Right,
that
right.
life happens,
That's not
like
the point of a
this
job.
idea that we're gonna have this ever increasing workforce that has no accountability for performance or no consequences for, I don't know, if your job's in, Nashville and you decide to move to Boston, like, the employer doesn't have to say, well, it sucks for us. Like, that's not,
Right, right.
like,
Yeah,
my point is, though, if you're against Trump, arguing against that particular executive order, I think it's pretty hard because, again, 11% defaults on FHA mortgages a few months ago. And, like, people are going to be very open to hearing those kinds of arguments. So I think most of these, there's a few exceptions. There's one that the national birthright citizenship thing, I think that'll get filed in the Supreme Court. And,
oh yeah,
the shaky ground. The reason the 14th Amendment was written was after the Dred Scott case
right,
to basically say slaves are citizens. If you're
yeah,
born here, you're a citizen.
right.
Okay, so they didn't think 200 years ahead or 100 years ahead or whatever to forecast that would be used the way it's being used now. So I don't think that's going to. I think but it is going to require Congress to get off their ass and have a conversation about, which I'm all for, right?
Exactly.
But these executive orders, I so far there's only a couple out of, so maybe, I don't know, 5-10% where you can say, okay, I could make a pretty good argument that this was not a great thing, but the vast majority of them are kind of hard to argue against,
Yeah. Well, just remained in Mexico. It makes perfect sense,
Yeah.
reinstating that. Ending the CBP1 app, that
Yeah.
makes perfect
Yeah,
sense.
well, all the immigration stuff and 10 years ago, people's number one complaint about politicians is they didn't keep their promises.
Right.
That was the number one complaint. 100% of the time,
Yeah.
people say, they say one thing, they get in the office and they do another thing. On day one, he did, I don't know, half of the things he promised to do in 4 years.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So I cut you off. I'm sorry, but I want to get that one last point in there about the executive orders. What was the thing you were asking me? Sorry.
Well, so, things that change and things that remain the same and things that get worse. So one of the things, so these are all been the things we're talking about are all things that are good in a significantly broken system, ruled by executive order. But the other thing that we've invested so much in the executive, and now the executive from now on, I think most presidents are going to have normalized the
Oh yeah,
idea of
yeah.
pardoning their whole family.
The pardon and preemptive pardons for their families.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not a legal scholar. I've never even been unlike you, Dave. I've never even been in a college classroom as a student. So this is just my gut
Sure.
talking. I have no legal foundation to base this upon. I think that'll go to the Supreme Court. I don't think that the founders intended for preemptive pardons to be a thing. I would not be shocked one bit if they just say you can't do that. You can't preemptively pardon somebody, especially into the future, which he did.
Right.
I mean, you could, you want to talk about how to set up a militia?
Yeah.
Like that's how you would set up a militia. Okay, these 8,000 people, I'm going to preemptively pardon, and now if they just go out and like start murdering people, like that's ludicrous. I'll be shocked if that withstands legal challenge if it goes to the
Is
Supreme
somebody
Court.
challenging
Again,
that?
I could be wrong.
Is
What's that?
somebody challenging that? Have you heard of a challenge to that?
I don't think we're going to hear anything about that until the confirmations are done. Now, again, I'm just spitballing here. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But if I was, Pam Bondi, I wouldn't be saying that now.
Yeah. Well,
I'd
sure.
be waiting until I got confirmed.
Yeah.
And then I'd come out and say, yeah, I don't think this is how it works. And we're gonna go ahead and challenge that. And so I think the preemptive ones at best will be drugged through the court system and go out. I also wouldn't be surprised if Congress doesn't act, and I think they would have tremendous bipartisan support to enact a constitutional amendment to ban at least the preemptive pardons.
Right.
If not, I mean, and they may even look at like restraining pardon power in some way. I'm not against pardons. I think
Sure.
it's a good thing to have. I really do. I know that there can be abuse, but if you look at historically how many people have been pardoned over the last 50 years, it's, I don't know, 10,000 or less. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a big number. I think the damage done from pardons is way less than not having the ability to do that. I think
Sure.
that there are
Yeah.
miscarriages of justice that they find out, and I think there's great things that come from that. The
Sure.
preemptive pardons, I think that's a whole different category. I don't consider that. I think that's a horrible thing.
Right.
It also makes everybody look guilty as hell. Like,
Well, see, I mean, it makes his entire family look at, people have been saying the Biden crime family forever. No, not Biden. Well, you just pardon them all. That just looks sus on the surface of it.
yeah, I don't know that you'd be able to restrict pardoning your family because, you know, they can be political targets, as we saw with Donald Trump. Like you can, again, whether you like the guy or not, he was clearly motivated by politics.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of legal scholars who look at the case in New York say this is flimsy at best, and it's a total miscarriage of justice at worst, and
Right.
and it's all hogwash. So if that would have happened to Donald Trump Jr., he should be able to pardon the guy, I think,
Sure.
in those kinds of situations. So I'm not anti-pardon. I think it's good to have that. I think the preemptive pardon thing is a separate category. I think that'll get challenged or dealt with in legislature, hopefully.
Yeah.
I also think this running the country with a new CEO every few years and completely changing course is not healthy. It's not sustainable. And I think that going back to the fourth turning, Gen Xers are coming into power. And
Yeah.
I think the legislature with a Gen X membership is going to be much different than the silent generation and
Sure.
baby boomers. I think it's going to have a different they're going to have a different level of authority, and they're not going to. Gen Xers are not prone to delegating things.
Right. Sure. That's
Gen Xers are much more like, get out of my way, and I'm just going to take care of it myself, because we're a very self-reliant
right.
generation.
Yep.
So I think a lot of this bureaucratic delegation that's happened in Congress that was not the way it was intended, I think that's going to be corrected just by that generation coming into power as is part of the fourth turning thesis.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and that's welcome too, because the
Oh yeah,
swamp, where the administrative state runs everything, and elected officials don't have any real, they just make speeches and go on
yeah,
TV. That's just got to go. So
yeah.
I welcome that. I welcome the end of the administrative overreach.
Well, I just welcome the politicians not really knowing what's, or the elected representatives not really being the ones who make decisions and don't oftentimes even know what's happening.
Right.
The lobbyists, I told you about when I helped write that bill in a state bill that became law. The lobbyist flat told me sometimes the elected official could come out and say, which way am I voting on this? Like, they don't, they're asking the lobbyist, like,
Yeah.
and then the bureaucrats they delegate everything to. I think that it's also going to come to a head, this, whatever the power the CIA and FBI and all the three-letter agencies in DC have over Congress, like whether it's, Tucker Carlson talks about this once in a while, where you say, like, he knows of actual elected officials in DC who say they won't say anything against the CIA because they'll just plant kiddie porn on your computer.
Yeah.
And like, what are you going to do? Like, it's the CIA doing it. Like, good luck, arguing against or fighting that, right?
Right.
I think that as these things come to light that have happened, as Trump, revokes the classification on things, and again, going back to my 2014 thing, as we start learning the things that happen in there,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be required that the elected officials stop allowing that, and the power of the deep state, or whatever, the blob, whatever you want to call them,
Yeah.
it will have to be diminished. Or when Kenny G's listening to this, he's going to be talking about what buffoons you and I are because we believed in representative democracy, and of course,
Yeah.
the totalitarian state is the way you should be.
Yeah, well, hopefully that won't be the case, and I don't think it'll be the case, just because the most efficient state is the one, or the best state is the one where people have representation. I mean, just the success of the United States indicates that. So I think that probably, my guess is, and maybe I'm wrong, my guess is that we'll probably be fine in that regard. But the other thing that is fascinating to me is about the new Trump presidency is, you saw that he revoked the security clearances of all the people that came out on the 100 laptop
Yeah,
issue. And I know, because I don't have security clearance, but I know people that do have security clearances. That's worth a lot of money.
they make a ton. They probably in the millions for many of, if not all of them. I mean, certainly hundreds of $1,000s for any of them, and in the maybe tens of millions or hundreds of millions for some of them.
Right.
I mean, if you're on the board of Bank of America board of directors and you have that clearance, and you can sniff out things that are coming 30, 90, 180 days, I mean, that's worth tremendous amounts of money. Yeah, he kneecapped their finances pretty good, and I'm all for it, by the way.
Oh, I am too. I mean, that was, he talks about a lot of things that are election interference. That one is definitely election interference. There was no doubt that was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, any others come to mind for you that were especially exciting?
Well, it's hard to keep up, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I've not seen like a full. I've seen a couple of like things, like, highlighting a few things. And I think we've covered most of those.
Yeah.
But I've not seen a complete list anywhere.
No,
I'm sure it's out there, but I've not seen it.
Well, and who knows? Maybe he's still signing. I don't know. There could be a bunch more that's coming. I don't know. I think the next thing on the docket's going to be the finishing up the cabinet. I think it's going to happen faster than some people think, and then we'll get to the managing.
I do. Yeah, I think that I think in a few months we'll look back on this and go, wow, we thought that was a blistering pace. Once the cabinet's in place, I think it's going to be a whole new level of blistering pace.
Yeah.
I do have to say one other thing for Kenny G, that again, I don't know if this would make the history books or what people talk about in 70 years from now, but the absolute stunning, over the top hypocrisy of the people who were talking shit about Trump doing preemptive pardons for his family in 2019 and 2020, or sorry, 2020 going into 2021.
Yeah.
And there's They're on video. It was on
Adam
TV. It was
Schiff.
recorded. Adam Schiff and Joy Reid and all these people saying, of course they must be guilty if he's going to do preemptive pardons. And then he didn't do it. I'm sure he probably considered it. He probably decided not to because he knew he wanted to run again. Probably
Right.
was a political decision. I'm not overlooking that. But the absolute stunning hypocrisy of those same people to come back and say, well, of course he had to do preemptive pardons because they were going to be politically attacked unfairly and all this stuff. I think these are the things that are going to give Trump tailwind and make it increasingly difficult for people to have conversations with friends and family and peers and whatever to say, nope, we need more of that. I think it might be the biggest like picture of hypocrisy I've ever seen. It is unbelievable.
And it empowers the revolt against that hypocrisy. X being run by Elon Musk,
Yeah.
Zuckerberg getting rid of that.
Transparency. Yeah.
It's social media having some level of not being in the can for one side. So that's because all of that. So we would know a lot of this stuff because we can't remember everything that happened, unless we see it coming through like social media accounts and alternative media. So, and that's got to be the thing that probably stings even more than losing the presidency for a lot of folks is losing the media lockbox control, because that empowers other conversations to happen that are very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it was actually kind of jarring, honestly, for me. I mean, I knew it was that way. Like what's happening, that's kind of under the current kind of a thing. But to see like the before and after videos was really jarring. It's disappointing at least that people could be on TV talking like that and having influence over people and just have that sheer lack of integrity. It was jarring to me. It really was something.
Hopefully it's the last gasp of all of that. I don't think it is, but hopefully it's the last.
No, I think the last gasp will come, maybe 12, 18 months from now. I think we're a ways away from the last gasp, but I do think that they'll continue doing that. And I suspect their viewership will continue to diminish until you'll be able to pick up MSNBC for $20 million or $50 million or some bargain basement price. And somebody will buy it, Sean Hannity or somebody will buy it who has that kind of cash and get funding or whatever. And we'll be on a new era of media. I really do. They are not turning course, which is actually shocking to me. I really thought that post inauguration, they would at least not go back and do the exact same things they were doing before, but they are doing the exact same things they were doing before.
Yeah,
it's wild.
It's hard to move an ideologically driven ship. Reality is secondary. Ideology is first.
One last thought. I'm the inauguration speech where the W. Bush and Obama and Biden and Clinton and Hillary Clinton all right there behind him as he's talking about that stuff.
Yeah.
The looks on their faces. And I don't know if you saw there's this new thing now where not new. There's recent videos where when like the Carter funeral, they had a lip reader decipher what Trump and Obama were chuckling about.
Really? I didn't see that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You should look it up. It's not worth talking about here, but it's interesting to like just it is mundane stuff, but they were still chuckling about at the inauguration, Obama said something to George W. Bush, and then and the lip reader deciphered it to be something like, "How do we stop what's about to happen?" is what Obama said to Bush.
Really?
No, he said it he's chuckling. He's giggling as he's saying it. But and then the awkwardness of that speech where Trump is just like, chastising them essentially through the speech, like saying what failures it all was.
Right.
I am so glad I was not in that room.
Oh yeah, I will tell you whenever they zoomed out to see Biden and Harris behind him, and Trump's talking about that, just zoom in on the president. I don't want to because that just looks so awkward for everybody.
It does, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if Trump actually felt it or not.
I doubt it. I would suspect he's too brash, or he probably giggled when he saw it later. But simultaneously, I was glad I was not in the room because it felt so awkward,
Yeah.
and I was 100% glad he said it.
Oh, sure, absolutely. That was a very clean break with the past. So
Yeah. All right. Well, as Dave mentioned in the opening, if you think there's something we're talking about here, we've completely missed the point. We'd love to hear that. Again, we're trying to explain to future generations what it feels like to live through this era in the American culture and society. You can do that at unsilentpodcast.com. Rumble's got a great comment section. And until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
see you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.